All right, everybody, welcome to the Libram Society, episode number 5. I am your host, Jason Hobbs.
And I'm your other host, Arlen Walker. Co-host, I guess. We
Yeah,
call ourselves co-hosts, or are we just both the main host?
I think we're both the man.
All right.
That's a good question, though. All right, everybody, welcome to the Libram Society. There we go. All right, looks like we already got some activity in the old YouTubes. That's good. Thanks so much for joining us. Today it's back to Malazan, Book of the Fallen, and we're still doing Gardens of the Moon, starting with Chapter 3. So what do you think, Arlen? You got any did you knows or anything like that you wanted to go over quick?
Any did you knows?
Not didgeridoos.
I don't think I have any did you knows for this section. But I'll turn it over to you if you have something.
So today is St. Patrick's Day. And I think St. Patrick's Day was like a deal because didn't like a bunch of snakes show up somewhere and St. Patrick chased them off? Isn't that kind of the story?
Yeah, you chased all the snakes out of Ireland.
Yeah. So sometimes, you're looking for a theme for a game. And I once had in my Shipshaven game, which was inspired by the adventure Secret of Bone Hill, there was snakes attacking the town, and it was some ritual that happened, and the characters had to like stop the ritual and free the snakes, or get rid of the snakes. So that was my St. Patrick's Day nod. I should do that again with Curse of the or Chronicle of the Cursed Axe, but it should be Snake Men.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't got any action on Twitch. You see anything good on YouTube?
Yeah, so on YouTube, so Fred Daniel says, "Hurrah, it's time for the Libram Society." So thanks, Fred. And Jonathan Davis says, "Best scene involving a sack of body parts." That's a question. So I suspect I know which scene that he is referring to, but we'll get to that.
I'm not even sure that's the best scene in the Malazan Book of the Fallen of a a sack of body parts. We got a lot to get through, so maybe we shouldn't mess around too much. All right, so I guess we have an epigraph to start with, as per usual. Is that what we called it? Is that right?
Yeah, an
I thought so.
epigraph.
All right, so do you want to go, or do you want me to on chapter 3 here?
Sure, I can go. Thelomen Tartheno Toblaki. Find the names of a people so reluctant to fade into oblivion. Their legend rots my cynical cast and blights my eyes with bright glory. Cross not the loyal cage embracing their unassailable heart. Cross not these solid menhirs, ever loyal to the earth. Thelomen Tartheno Toblaki, still standing, these towering pillars mar the Gelid-scape of my mind.
Gothos Folly by Gothos. So I always pronounce it very close to what you do. Thelomen Tartheno Toblaki is what I say.
Toblaki? Yeah.
Toblaki. It just feels, I don't know why, but that's what I always say. So what do you, after reading chapter 3, what does this have to do with chapter 3?
I don't know exactly what this has to do with chapter 3, although it seems like there's definitely pieces of this that I would say, really connect to a lot of the stuff in the story in general, right?
Yes.
Find the names of a people so reluctant to fade into oblivion, right? That's one of the kind of big thematic things that's all over Malazan Book of the Fallen, right? Is this idea of kind of old empires and old stories and old legends that some of them have faded and some of them have remained, and what's true and what's not and all that sort of stuff.
I think I mean, we don't really hear too many things about and why does a single people need three names? That I haven't totally figured out. But I mean, I just realized today that we do have a character in this chapter that is one of these races. So, which is pretty interesting. But there aren't many. Like if you use Malazan Wiki or anything like that, you'll see. But like we know, there's lots of cultures or even species. I guess you're not supposed to say race exactly, but in some ways it almost feels like it maybe fits this because they actually they are different races, right? Than not compared to species like humans, but they actually are. And some of them are ancient ones that have, were around a long, long, long time ago as far as the Malazan goes. But as is our wont, let's hop into the first scene of chapter 3. So what I thought was interesting in this scene is it doesn't tell us when it's happening. So then you would actually assume that it's happening at the same time, maybe, as the last scene was.
That's definitely my assumption. My assumption was that it's happening at about the same time.
And so what do you think about this first scene? I mean, we obviously see Ganos Perrin, and he's joined once again by the Warren hopping Topper, but now he's on a boat. So it's like a boat full of dudes. And I thought it was really interesting, basically, how he is saying how difficult it is to find him on a boat through the Warren. So it's kind of like a hint maybe, or another look at using the Warrens for travel. Do you have any thoughts on that? Or
yeah, that's definitely, I think there's something about the way that we're learning more about how these Warrens work, kind of both to cast and to travel and all that sort of stuff. The idea that it seems to me to fit in with, there's a sort of implicit question when Topper shows up through the Warren at Ganos Perrin's, his spot on the boat, basically his cabin or whatever it is. Which is, why didn't Perrin travel by Warren to Genebacus, right? That there's sort of an interesting question there. Or why doesn't Topper just take him with him whenever he's going to leave or something like that? And it seems like that becomes important later as their sort of discussion starts to become about this, as we find out through the chapter about what it is that Perrin is supposed to be doing, that maybe there's something about these Warrens that makes them trackable or traceable to the sort of people that Ganos is looking for, right? And it seems like that is sort of setting us up for that, almost, this idea of the connection between Ganos Perrin's sort of target, for lack of a better term, and the Warrens of magic.
And throughout these scenes in chapter 3, I really was starting to maybe even reaffirm my thought process of why he does scenes before. Like, you'll see a scene in the previous chapter, even the previous book, that then becomes evident later. Like, it is like almost foreshadowing throughout the entire series. So, which is why I wanted to do this show, because it's so deep, and maybe we would be able to like cut back to scenes or something and then say, oh, this is why we learned that, because this is what's going to happen. But it's also, when I was talking to Hawk recently, I think on Sunday, where he was talking about the Libram Society and the series in general, was this idea that you have to pay so much attention to everything, right? It's pretty.
Yeah, and in fact, so Jonathan Davis in the YouTube says chapter 2, Tayscrin references new scrolls of Gothos' folly being found in the Black Dog Forest, beyond the Black Dog Forest, and that might have to do with this idea of Gothos' folly, right? Because that's what the epigraph is from,
right?
right?
Exactly.
And it's subtle things like that that you have to pay attention to if you want to get kind of everything that's in these books. So, yeah, thanks for that, Jonathan.
Yeah, perfect. This is exactly why we want it to be such a raucous crowd at the Libram Society, and having you guys add stuff. It's fantastic. So we love to see that. So let's head over to the room that I have set up where I have hand-picked some images. So today this is an image of Topper. This was from the original meeting of Ganos and Topper, which I thought was interesting. And you could see how green he enjoys, and then he's complaining about these colors. And it's been 2 years since Ganos saw Topper here like this and made his first trip through the Imperial Warren. It's not a sack full of body parts, but I think it was a sack for lunch at the time. But we also learned that, that Topper is like half Tistandi and half human. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of an interesting thing, where I actually found another artist rendition of the different races of Malazan, Book of the Fallen, and like their heights and what they look like. And so we'll get to that later. But I thought it would be cool to see this. I guess he does, put out the plan that basically Perrin is supposed to become the new captain of the Bridge Burners, basically the group that we saw last chapter that has been greatly diminished. Mm-hmm. They had just lost 1,300 men basically in the Siege of Pale or something like that. So pretty interesting. Did you have anything you wanted to say about this picture or anything?
No, it's kind of I remember him talking about all the green clothing, but it's kind of different to see, a picture of somebody dressed all in green. Looks a little funny, but no. And I think there is. So Topper talks about Perrin taking over the Bridge Burners, and isn't there some discussion of the possibility that whoever Perrin is looking for in the Bridge Burners may have corrupted like the entire Second Army, right? That this may be a lot bigger than what they had originally planned. And I think Perrin sort of says something or thinks something about how they've waited a while to take advantage of all of this, and have they waited too long?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he even talks about Dujek possibly becoming renegade or something. And he can't believe that's possible. So, yeah, that is pretty interesting. All right, so it looks like now we move forward a little bit, and it's just a very quick. Here's another one of those instances of a quick scene where you're not necessarily even sure why this scene is here. I mean, it's a couple pages, and basically an unnamed agent of the Claw, meets up at the port where Perrin shows up. Do you have any thoughts about this?
I thought it was interesting. I thought there was a neat little detail when the agent who is Talk the Younger, right, at the dock.
Not yet. No, we don't.
Oh, not yet.
Yet. No.
Oh, you're talking about the other. Let me.
Yeah,
flip
this
through
is
it
this is like just. There's just a couple pages here of basically it seems like this Claw agent having an impression of Ganos, and then it being totally turned on its side when he actually meets him. It's just a couple pages.
Oh, right. That little short bit.
Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting. And he talks about the quarrels,
mm-hmm. the Moranth and the quarrels.
The Moranth and the quarrels.
Which I think if we're going to take that to the table, it's pretty interesting, basically. I think I might have an image that I found. Yeah, here we go. So yeah, this is not this section of the book, obviously, because the Moranth, who are the riders of these giant dragonflies, basically, mm-hmm. Have a huge caste caste system, and the gold haven't even been seen. I think later in the chapter, Whiskey Jack or Dujek talk about, we haven't even seen the gold yet. So these are the same Morant that basically had their massive revenge against the people of Pale at the end of the siege. So, and it totally changed the way of war because now we actually have aerial assistance. So another pretty cool picture.
Pretty cool. Reminds me of I don't know if you ever played Morrowind, the third Elder Scrolls game, but they have the Silt Striders, the giant sort of bug sort of things that are how they transport themselves, mostly sort of like caravans of these giant bugs that are long-legged and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's something, there's something very kind of strange and out there about the different stuff you can do to go to the gaming table with kind of species that we don't normally see, like human animal hybrids, or like insects that are vastly oversized, or all these ways to take something familiar and turn it into something that is no longer like that, right? To create that sense of the uncanny almost.
I have to admit, I have used giant dragonflies in Kalmata, actually. And they look awesome. They're pretty, but they're also kind of scary looking with the size of their mandibles, and even like maybe this tail has can do a stinger or something like that. I think Jonathan Davis added that there was I was thinking about this tonight when I was preparing for the show, is that he basically says it was interesting that Perrin was ignorant of quarrels, right? And I think that Erickson does a really good job of each scene picking a point of view and keeping the knowledge that that point of view wouldn't have away from the characters. So you really get to see this concept of, how big the empire might be, how slow news travels, how important that information might be. I find that really intriguing, and how well that it's done in the series, because you constantly see people maybe having, what do they call that? The false narrator, or questionable narrator. Is that it? You know what I'm talking about? Kevin always mentions it.
The unreliable narrator.
Unreliable, that's it. The unreliable narrator. And then we'll come and see that depending on whose omniscience that we're seeing through, that they were, that's it. And we may know as the reader that that these guys are acting incorrectly because they don't know yet what the correct information is. So that seems... I really like that. And also I think that might be a really good theme for military type, be it sci-fi or fantasy, is to keep that in mind, is that how important that information is, and then how the characters interact because of it. So pretty darn cool. All right. So, and then we shift over to, what'd you think about this next scene with Bellerdan and Tattersail with first of all, I thought it was really interesting that a soldier went to find her as their cadre mage to deal with this Toblakai wizard, basically, or the Thelamin High Mage actually is what he is, a High Mage, which we had discussed last episode. Pretty gross. It's kind of a nasty scene.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of nasty. The idea of carrying Night Chill's the name, her body, or what? Not even her body, but like the remains around, right? And that he does eventually let her cast the I can't remember what she calls it, but the spell to like keep the smell encased.
Sealing spell.
The sealing spell, yeah.
Like. Who's taking the sealing spell with their with that utility spell? And what else could you do with a sealing spell in your game? You might be able to use it like almost like maybe you would let a player change their silence into mute olfactory senses or something like that. maybe I like in a D&D type game or something.
Yeah.
So that's pretty interesting. We can. What's a good name for? We could head over to the art gallery.
Yeah, the art gallery. I like that.
Believe it or not, here is an artist rendition of Bellerdan and Night Chill. So basically, Toblakais are supposedly twice the size of a man.
Well, and I thought it was interesting that right, he's a caster too, right? He's a high mage.
Yeah.
So she says, you know, can I cast this spell for you, basically, rather than telling him to just cast it. Yeah. Which I thought was kind of an interesting. I don't know if that's something about like they're supposed Warrens, to tell us a little bit about what they're Warrens, what they're able to do with their powers, or if that's more to suggest, maybe it even suggests that there's something about, because she, I think, mentions during the sorcerer's duel the way that her kind of emotional state is making it harder for her to control the magic, and so maybe that's what we're supposed to understand, is that Bellerdan's kind of, you know, grief makes it harder for him not just to think about other people, but to actually just, you know, do this kind of relatively light and easy magic to make it more comfortable for everybody around him.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Gentle repose. Hey, nice, Fred.
Yeah.
Hey, I see Vanishing Tower Press is in there. I don't think I've seen him around. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if we should even be on Twitch anymore, because all the action seems to happen on YouTube, my man.
Definitely a lot of action on YouTube right now.
There are some people on Twitch, though. They're just not talking, which I can understand.
Yeah.
Right. So let's head out of the art gallery back to the... now do we need a name for this? The foyer? Is this the foyer where we hang out? I don't know. The next scene was pretty interesting because, I mean, once again, they're on this hill where all this terrible stuff happened. Hey, Eric Thomas Hunt.
Yeah.
On this hill, basically, where, I mean, all of the cadre was basically destroyed and a bunch of people died. And then they also did the soul shift for Hairlock here. But this time it is kind of the three main people that we've mostly seen from the bridge burners. Did you get anything from this scene? Face gallery. To me, it just seems like Quick, Ben, and Callum have really decided that the Empire is against them, and they're basically trying to convince Whiskey Jack that he doesn't need to.
Yeah.
The Empire is not interested in their best interests.
Yep.
Right.
There is an important detail about there's some low-ranking officer had delivered Taskrin's commiserations on those lost in the line of duty, and then had unloaded a wagon load of tripe about heroism and sacrifice. His audience of 39 stone-faced soldiers had looked on without a word. The officer was found dead in his room 2 hours later, expertly garroted. And what that I think is important is we're going to find out some more information about that event and more about that later, but it's just sort of a throwaway moment here that seems to only be about what happens here. But once we talk the Younger, he's going to tell us that this was a Claw agent that was killed,
which is another example of the unreliable narrator, or this idea that these people don't know who did it.
Yeah.
And they did it almost under this action that, this is kind of what happens when you're in Pale after a siege. Some dudes, if they're not happy, they get killed by their people under their command.
And Callum even suggests that it was a Claw setup to frame the bridge burners, which is kind of a whole interesting, because they don't know who the Claw actually are. They have no idea that it wouldn't have been the Claw doing it, because of course that was, they wouldn't I guess they might send one of their own to kill one of their own, but probably wasn't done by the Claw, as we'll find out. I think we can suspect it's well, I think we know who it is by the end of this chapter.
All right. So, all right. Now we go back to now we're seeing Tattersail do a reading with the deck of dragons or her Fatid with
Mm-hmm.
Taskrin, basically the leader of Pale and the highest of the high mages.
Yep.
What I mean in this reading, obviously Tattersail gets some more information than Taskrin actually does, which maybe shows her strength as an adept. I think that's what they call them, adepts, when they're talking about reading the deck of dragons.
Yep. Yep. Talk about adepts, the readers and ascendants, the characters who are sort of being read about.
Which are also like gods, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think we would call them gods in D&D or something like that.
Yes,
but,
yes.
Yeah, I think we mentioned this before, how the picture on the card can change. So it isn't like the Knight of Shadows isn't always the same person. Sometimes that may change in who the House Shadow uses. So it's interesting how, like, it's almost this sounds funny, like you could use this as a GM to show where power factions are shifting around. If you were doing something like a deck of dragons or something like that, you could it would be a way to relay information to the players, and without using these spells of divining, right?
Yeah.
And it would be a cool way, instead of them just saying, all right, you roll a die and okay, this is the vision that you have. All right, now it's this time you pull out your knuckle bones and they shift and they show that the dragons is nicer because it's actually, Erickson can use this, or the book uses this as a way to really depict what's going on in a way that like reading tea leaves or palms may not be as easily done.
Mm-hmm.
Which I thought was pretty cool. Did you have anything else?
We see shadow characters again, right? Which is some of the kind of big reveals about the shadow haven't been made, but the rope is talked about here, the assassin of shadows, who I can't remember if they used that name in the very beginning of the kind of main story, not the prologue, but when Sari gets transformed and all that. But we're going to find out about that very, very soon to put two and two together. We also see,
go ahead.
Mm-hmm. We also see some little bits about, like what seems to be kind of, important, like, so in actual, or I say actual tarot, in real life tarot, right, it matters how the card shows up. So like a card that is facing down instead of facing up, that matters to the reading and all that sort of stuff. And there's some details sort of like that in here. But it's kind of unclear exactly what that means here, especially when the details seem to be focused on Opon, which is the two-faced card. And so why is it about that? Or is it just another kind of case of, I'm not sure if there's a way. Yeah, I don't know what it means, but it seems significant that we didn't hear about that the last time that card showed up, because it showed up in the first reading.
One of the things, just to shift slightly, that I find interesting again is this idea that they're trying to set a trap for Lysine, the Empress, meaning Shadow Throne and the rope. But everyone seems, I shouldn't say everyone, but a lot of powerful people seem to see right through it, including Lysine and the adjunct. And then right here, just doing this reading as an adept, she figures out, oh, it's the recruit who has been affected. You know what I'm saying? It just seems, in some ways, it's like, what kind of plot are these ascendants doing that everyone seems to be able to see right through them anyway? So is that really the plot? That's kind of what I wonder sometimes.
Well, there's almost a sort of quality of, like the layering of plots, I think, is one of the things we're supposed to understand from all of what's in here, and the way that, like, yes, this is kind of one thing going on, but is this kind of what they want you to react to in order to make the real plot happen, or is that the real plot, or is that the real plot, or is
if I do this, then they do that, then you do that, then this.
Yeah.
What is it?
Like they say in memes, 5D chess.
What? 5D chess?
Yeah, like playing chess in the fifth dimension.
I don't think I was thinking of the Princess Bride when Never do
Oh,
a thing
yeah,
with
that's
but
another.
Did you know that I would actually do this? Honestly, it didn't matter because I've already been immune to poison or whatever.
Yep.
So yeah, that's what it reminds me of. So we hear more about the Khan and the coin of Opon, and I just found it really shows also that these NPCs that you run into, say Tattersail's your character, and you're like, oh, I got to be afraid of Taskrin because of his power, and already mentioned how much power, raw power he has, but maybe it's more in a different way, right? Like she definitely has these divining powers and this ability to cast a sealing spell where maybe Bellerdan didn't, even though he's considered a high mage. So, I mean, there's just some interesting stuff there. And that also she makes a decision. I think that's an important part of this too, that it seems like she's ready to perhaps join in with the bridge burners.
Yeah.
Because she sends basically a boy. So, and then the next chapter is the one that you mentioned, is Captain Pran arriving on the quarrel with the Black Moranth, and just a little bit of information about the Moranth, and basically him being disgusted with his lack of knowledge. So another way that Gardens of the Moon is emphasizing how important knowledge is to all these plans within plans, for sure. So Perrin really kind of has become a spy, and he has been since that scene on Idokan when he joined up with the adjunct. So
yeah.
So it kind of adds, a little bit of spy activity to the story, which I find pretty interesting. The information that Tak the Younger has for Perrin really seems to surprise him. We can head over to the art gallery.
Yeah, he's got he mentions
just the idea that this information that Whiskey Jack used to be a commander seems like a surprise to Perrin.
Yeah.
And because it was stripped from all of the annals, but he just kind of mentions it off the wall, and Perrin even's like, does everyone know this? How do I not know this? Does everyone know it? I got a picture of an artist rendition here of Tak the Younger.
Nice.
Which he kind of, I don't know if I would expect him to see this, but maybe that means that, yeah, your regular messenger group has a thing like that. Let's take a quick poll. You guys, do you like this Tak the Younger or this Tak the Younger? He seems to be a pretty popular character. This seems more like the impression that Perrin gets from him is that his face is really jacked up, like it's burned and he's missing an eye. Whereas this isn't. That almost, to me, seems more gallant somehow. I don't know if it's just the pose or what. What do you think? Arlen's like, I don't know, man.
I don't know. I agree that seems like it ought to be the one riding a horse. It seems like it's mostly just his eye missing, and not like I imagine like a whole bunch of his face and up into his hairline and all that kind of scarred and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Pretty nasty.
Pretty nasty.
All right. So it seems like we get a bunch of information, like an info dump from Tak the Younger, which is cool. And then we go farther into Perrin meeting, going to the barracks and only finding like one bridge burner there. And Picker apparently doesn't seem too interested in giving a lot of information out other than like exactly it's pretty obvious that the bridge burners don't expect, and even Tak the Younger, Perrin to last very long, right?
Yep.
And you even see that when they go to the bar where they're at, called Knobs Inn. Have you ever had a Knobs Inn in your game?
I've never had a Knobs in my game.
Me either. Maybe I need to.
Mm-hmm.
But we get to meet some more people, and I think it's funny during this introductions that basically who Hedge, none of these other guys matter. They're just part of the second.
Yep.
Which is I think is pretty cool, and I think there's another little bit in here kind of where maybe they show that Perrin isn't who they thought he was, which we're seeing quite a bit throughout this chapter. I think that's kind of maybe a theme throughout the chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Do I have an? Yeah, this is what I was going to show. So we meet another thing. This is like a big image, and it might be kind of tough to see. But here are the races. So we haven't seen a Talanomass, but here's a human. This is actually an image of Ganos, I think. And a Trell. And here's one of the Moranth. But you can see a lot of these races are like 7 feet tall. Here's a Barghast. We meet Trots as a Barghast. So this is a really cool image. Yap Attack. Quite a few of the images that I've shown are from this guy, Yap Attack.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and then here, way at the end, is a Toblakai, a Thelamin Toblakai, topping 9 feet tall. So almost like a Goliath size or something. They kind of are mentioned like them being half giants or something. So, and here's some crazy thing at the end for sure. So, all right. I don't think we learn a whole lot, but then the scene just ends with you want to talk about it?
Yeah, so Perrin kind of makes his point to the bridge burners and leaves, and then goes out, and he's in sort of an alleyway in Pale, and gets attacked. And it's he not just gets attacked, but he gets stabbed, and he's like bleeding out and dying. And then he hears a little bit of conversation between Amanus and Cotillion, the Shadow Throne and the Rope. And I don't remember if he recognizes. I think he feels like that he knows who it. I can't remember. Let me read through it really quickly. See. Oh yeah, the voice seemed to come from a girl or a child, yet he knew it was the voice of his killer. I think it's implied there that he has some sense that he actually, if he survives, and we'll find out that there's some shenanigans that go on pretty soon, but that he might actually have more information that maybe this is a misstep by the people that he's chasing.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to kill him like this. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was. It's interesting because it's not even basically Cotillion is how I pronounce that, but
Yeah.
Cotillion is actually just inside Sari, and basically is like just talking to Ominous when he shows up.
Yep.
Ominous. I didn't even realize if I pronounced it that way, it was saying ominous.
Yeah.
I think I always should do Amanus, but I kind of like Amanus better. All right, so
Yeah.
I think we got time for chapter 4. Do you think so?
Yeah. Well, I was gonna do one more something from it. Lysine remains our target, and the collapse of the empire she rules but never earned, which is kind of a really interesting. It's sort of like a really interesting concept, sort of the idea of an earned empire.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few Romans who would say a lot of the rulers didn't earn that empire that they ended up ruling.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and specifically even more than that, this idea of kind of all of these people, even even the former emperor who built the empire, it wasn't like he did it alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And did he earn the empire? In a sense, if he depended upon, all these people like Whiskey Jack and Dujek One Arm and Decim Ultor and all these different names that are getting thrown around about the people who helped build the empire, right? There's a sort of interesting question there, I think.
Me too. I also would mention that basically Shadow Throne says something I should say, has entered our warren uninvited. My hounds hunt. So there's another like it's almost like in a movie you could see like sometimes when you're reading this how they definitely had the idea of a script in the way they do it, because you don't always see this transition written in books to go from chapter to chapter. Sometimes it just ends and then goes on, but I think he seems to like to do that. And I think as far as the epigraph goes, Jonathan Davis mentioned that there is sort of a lot of the chapter before maybe does the epigraph for the next chapter, because that's happened almost every time. Fellison, Gothos, Folly was brought. It was mentioned in the other one, and now for chapter 4,
now it's Talk the Younger.
Is Talk the Younger. They were of a kind. Then the histories writ large in tattooed tracery. The tales a tracking of old wounds, but something glowed hard in their eyes. Those flame-gnawed arches, that vanishing span, they are their own past, each in turn destined to fall in line on the quiet wayside beside the river they refuse to name. What in the hell is this about?
Well, the title is The Bridge Burners.
Oh yeah, duh.
That tells us at least a little bit, right? And the imagery, right? The flame-gnawed arches, that vanishing span, all that sort of stuff, right? Sounds to me like that's the image, right? That's the bridge with the fire reaching up to it.
It sounds like any soldier, though, part of it, right?
Plenty of it, yeah. The each destined to fall in line on the quiet wayside beside the river they refuse to name. Seems like that's very classic imagery of kind of the idea of the
river Styx, right?
Dying, the river Styx or something like that. The whatever it is that the underworld is, or even perhaps a literal river. In this case, it could be if there's like a particular battle that this is written after. We don't have a lot of specific information, but about what kind of caused this to be written, right? But it could tie into the idea of the way that their battles have been erased from the official Malazan history, right? The river they refuse to name, not just being the sort of river Styx imagery, but also like a literal river where they fought and died and that they aren't allowed to name anymore would be another piece of that, I think.
Yeah, that makes some sense. And maybe that's what they were referring to in the previous chapter. I don't even remember what they said exactly. Or what
it was told him. In the 7 cities, in the desert.
Oh, okay.
And that's where Kamal, is it Kamal?
Callum.
Yeah, I'm getting characters confused with games. And Quick Ben, I think it's mentioned that they came from the 7 cities, or at least one of them did, and were captured by Whiskey Jack basically and made to fight for the Empire.
It looks like on YouTube, Jonathan Davis is saying that he feels like after chapter 3, things are actually starting to happen and stuff is going down, which surprises me. Like the Battle of Pale, nothing happened, but it did feel like a prologue of what the story actually is about.
Yeah, and we're still pretty early in the story, right? In a lot of ways, we're really kind of ramping up to not just what's happening in general, but what the book is going to be about, right?
Yeah, it's almost like the beginning of like Saving Private Ryan, where the battle is crazy and vast and huge and impressive and ridiculous, and parts of it matter. Maybe more parts of it of the Siege of Pale matter than in Saving Private Ryan, I guess. I don't know for sure, but pretty darn interesting. So in the beginning of chapter 4, it feels like we have a pretty important scene basically with all the bridge burners, not all of them, but the main ones that we've talked about in the past, Whiskey Jack, Column, Quick Ben, talking to Tattersail, and they're detailing their plan a little bit, and what Hairlock's been doing and why, right?
Yeah.
So anything from this that you were really... one of the things that I thought was really interesting, again, I'm saying that a lot tonight, but one of the things that struck me is how often when Tattersail is the narrator, she kind of has this sexuality about her when she's looking at men and judging them and deciding, things about them. She's often mentioning, I don't know if it's sensuality or what, but just the way she thinks, you certainly get a feeling for her, because a lot of times we have talked about, like, whenever she's around, she's talking about her previous lovers or how important Kalat was to her. And now when she talks about the different guys, and she always seems to be trying to figure people out as well. I think that's pretty cool, because he does a good job of explaining or doing different characters in different ways. Now, if you were to take that into a game, people would say you don't always have to have a different voice, but maybe if you put a different hat on or put like a monocle up to your eye, it helps people realize you're talking about a different character. And in a book like this, when there's so many different characters, having different ways of doing that as an author, I think is really good. It's another reason that I enjoy Erickson, maybe. And there are so many characters they're hard to keep track of. I'm not saying that it isn't. That's intentional, though, I think.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I thought it was interesting because this is, I think, really the first time they've talked about this idea that the Warrens are sort of only kind of one side of what exists sort of metaphysically in this universe, right? That there's the Warrens and then there's chaos, and Hairlock is using the chaos stuff to break the rules of the Warrens. And I thought that was really interesting because that kind of is, I think, suggestive of sort of the larger, right? That's like
cosmology almost, right?
Yeah,
it's like in D&D, you have like the ethereal plane where all the other dimensions somehow rest inside of it.
Yeah.
But this even adds another aspect of it, because those dimensions actually feed the magic, which is, I don't know, it's fascinating to me. That's one of my favorite things about Malazan is the Warrens and the magic system. And we're just barely touching the edges of it.
Yep.
So what else happens in this scene that you find interesting? I see Fiddler's there too. I missed him.
What else happens in here?
Fiddler's around a lot, but he doesn't seem to do much. He's almost like comic relief in some ways.
Well, and that's right. That's a real thing with certain people, is that there's the class clown type character whose job it is. But what I was going to say is that Fiddler does. He did show up in the prologue, right? It was, I think,
he's been around.
He's been around in some of the places
with Whiskey Jack for a long time.
He's a veteran soldier who can handle himself, because he wouldn't have survived this long if he hadn't been. So
9 or 10 years through all of these battles with Whiskey Jack, and he still isn't. It's not like he has a really high title or rank in the hierarchy. Yep. So that also tells you something, I think.
Yeah. Well, and that sort of goes back to, because Janos Perrin was talking about this idea of how he sort of expected to like advance up through the ranks and become important within the Malazan military and all that sort of stuff. And then once he gets to Pale and we see all this stuff in Pale, he sees kind of the other side of that, which is the successful guys, they stay as the sergeants, right? The old joke about the, promotion is a way to get people who aren't good at making decisions out of the decision-making chain.
Kind of goes back to what Whiskey Jack said in the prologue, right? Live quietly.
Yep. Live quietly.
So, so we get we get another view here that Quick Ben and these guys have all figured out some stuff. talking about, we learned that Adjunct Lorne is a personal mage killer. And basically that they're talking about the Idokan hounds being released on the Malazan people. Just like they're trying to, more information or more evidence of them trying to disseminating what knowledge they have, and how, like Tattersail, as powerful she is, she doesn't know anything about any of it. And basically that Hairlock is, like you said, traveling the Warrens, but Whiskey Jack is like riding on his shoulder, seeing everything that he's doing so he can keep track of him, because he's also like kind of a loose cannon that they have, just let loose to try and help figure out this plot that goes back to like originally kind of the murder story idea. Anything else in here that we wanted to mention? There's other things, like they mentioned the Tist Dur, and basically Quick Ben, Tattersail has no idea who they are, but she's lived for 200 years. Quick Ben says, cousins of the Tistandi? I don't know. And she doesn't seem to believe him. And this is where they basically say that Sari is connected to House Shadow. They come to that conclusion after like trying to, put the yarn. I can almost see these guys having their own little investigative wall where they had all the pictures and then the yarn between them.
Well, and this is the first time that somebody actually like explicitly puts together the idea of the Emperor and Dancer, Emperor Kellanved and Dancer being in charge of House Shadow, right?
Oh, does that happen here?
Yeah, because Callum's gaze was veiled. Odd, isn't it? After all, the Warren only appeared following the Emperor's assassination at Lysine's hand. Shadow Throne and his companion, the patron of assassins, Cotillion, were unheard of ever before Kellanved and Dancer's deaths. It also seems that whatever disagreement there is between House Shadow and the Empress Lysine is personal.
That is there, but I can tell you that a lot of readers miss it still at that point. Hawk even mentioned that he was like, oh my God, this is a huge reveal. How did I not see that before? When it's in a lot of ways, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Once you go back, it's not that veiled, really. I would be curious to see, like, if any of our listeners or the people that are hanging out in the audience, we need a special name for our audience. I don't know what that would be, but what they think. Was it obvious to you before now that Dancer and Kellanved are indeed Shadow Throne and the Rope, Cotillion? And it makes you wonder, does the Empress know that? Does Adjunct Lorne know that? Because I've never got that impression.
Yep. I remember the first time reading it being like, not as if it was like a huge reveal when it becomes more reinforced, but feeling like, this, it didn't come out of nowhere, but it was definitely not here in like the first couple of relatively first couple of pages for the whole series, right? We're talking about, how far are we in on your version, Hobbs? Because I'm on my Kindle right now, so I can't see.
We're like 100 pages in.
Yeah, we're like 100 pages in of a 10,000 page series or something like that.
Yeah.
So we're pretty early on in the series to be talking about who, in terms of, characters being pretty upfront about, this idea.
Yeah, and they keep on mentioning this Dassem Altor because I think that's where they feel like the start of the things collapsing began. He made a deal with a god. He accepted a god's offer. And so Hood made Dassem his Knight of Death. So there's more emphasis or more underlying importance of this concept that people can ascend. But as soon as ascendants start being involved, then other ones do. It's almost like that. I feel like I've read this in another series that as long as no gods get involved, no other gods can get involved. But as soon as the first one does, then it's like open, and now all heck breaks loose because the people are the pawns of the gods. And once the gods start, this is another theme of Malazan, obviously, that these conjunctions of power and this concept of who pays the price when ascendants get involved, and it's usually the common man or the soldier.
Well, it sort of actually even reminds me of like some of the ancient literature, like in the Iliad, the gods like come down, and sometimes they're like taking on sort of like the warrior's helper or something like that. So they just pass him spears and he does the work. But sometimes they're doing shit on the battlefield while Achilles and Hector and Diomedes and Patroclus and the rest of them are duking it out fighting. There's a lot of kind of and there's a lot of pretty direct involvement by the divine in that story that you cannot count on at all. And I think that's one of the things that is in Malazan, is that because these gods are or these ascendants are the way they are, they're capricious, right? And mercurial. So
they
you can't
keep their human natures or whatever nature they had before, which is also reminiscent of Greek and Roman mythology. Even Norse early civilization.
Pantheons. Well, and it's definitely not like sort of like D&D clerical magic where it's like, ring up my god for 3 healing spells today, please. That sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. It also, I mean, when you think of like Elric, it would common be like in the Elric stories, he would be fighting against someone of law or chaos or whatever. And then the gods of law and chaos would be battling elsewhere, or even Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. I think this is a kind of trope throughout epic fantasy or fantasy literature.
Yeah.
So pretty cool stuff. And there's more of this information about like High House Shadow, the Knight, the King, this hierarchy of the people within the deck of dragons or the Fatid. So pretty interesting stuff. All right, so now we slip into the next scene, and we basically find that Perrin is actually alive, and he rests on the threshold of Hood's gate. It's a scene that I found there's one of my favorite characters in this scene it's Opon, who is actually 2 different people, twins, talking. It is the person that at first I think we think is Hood, but isn't. Right? It's this apparition that arrives, and Opon, the brother, scowls, "You are not Hood." And he just shifted under creaking skin. The Lord is busy. And this apparition we find to be, I don't know, he just, in some ways, kind of flippant for the job that he has. Did you have any thoughts about that or no?
I don't know.
Well, here's another example of Erickson using, or the book using, a process of really like showing how different this character is from them. And I think this character is really high Gygaxian. The words that he uses are pretty crazy. So here's the first one that we see him use.
Mellifluous.
You can't hear it, Aaron, but I'm actually playing like Google's.
Mellifluous.
A voice or words, sweet or musical, pleasant to hear. Now, I've never heard of this word before here. I had to look it up at the time.
Mellifluous.
And it's interesting. I don't see all the other characters using crazy words like this. As the book goes on, I think you'll see more and more characters having such different personalities that if you can almost picture them, they're the actor doing them, or the things that the actor would really draw into to show how, and I'm not saying that no books do this, but I think he does a really good job. The next one he does is this one.
Reciprocity.
The practice of exchanging things, where basically Opon says they want to do this exchange, and then this apparition mentions this reciprocity where you're going to kill someone else and I'll take his soul, or Hood will take that soul instead, but the soul has to be within Perrin's shadow, and Perrin is not happy with that.
Mm-hmm.
Which the apparition is
Pathos.
Mentions that he hates pathos, another Gygaxian word to me. I was like, I I've seen the word. I always thought it was pathos.
Pathos.
But everybody out there, apparently it is pathos, a quality that evokes pity or sadness. Did you notice this with this character or not?
A little, definitely. Definitely noticed. Now that you're pointing it out, I'm thinking through all the stuff and thinking about that. Mm-hmm.
So then they all take off, right? The apparition, Opon take off, and almost immediately I'm surprised at this, but we basically see Shadow Throne show up with the hounds. And so so I thought Shadow Throne was referring to Hairlock, basically, looking around, but it almost makes you feel like the throne of shadow or the shadow realm rests on the edge of Hood's gates. Is that the impression that you got?
Yeah, there's kind of an interesting sort of back to the cosmology. There's kind of an interesting question of the relationship between these different groups, right? The kind of element of like there's light and dark and shadow in between them. That makes sense. And then there's life and death is shadow between them, and like a sort of almost like a cross shape or something. And is somehow that perhaps part of why shadow is so present in the story, right? Because it's sort of the crossroads for all these different things.
Maybe.
Magically. I don't know.
I don't know either. But Jonathan David mentions, he's asking, do you think Perrin, like in a game, would you have a character not actually die and then say there's some kind of
reciprocity
that happens for that particular character, that there's an exchange that leads to some other story? Because I mean, I think there have been people in the past to mention that the characters might be part of a prophecy, and if that's the case, you know, what keeps them alive? I probably wouldn't, but lives are cheap in Kalmata, so I probably wouldn't move to this, and the gods really don't interact that much. So
I think I was playing this sort of kind of high fantasy, lots and lots of magic, high interaction from the gods compared to a lot of stuff I normally do, which is a lot more kind of sword and sorcery when I do fantasy. I think the idea of having like a fight you absolutely cannot win and then bringing the character back is kind of an interesting one, right? Because Perrin is basically assassinated by an avatar of a god. Right. There's no way he's going to walk away from that. Okay.
Or the god himself, apparently.
Or the god himself. Right. Yeah. In which case, I think the idea of like having that as sort of like a set piece thing almost, where like it's a, you know, in video game terms, like it's a cutscene where you get shot in the cutscene after fighting your way through all the enemies beforehand, that sort of thing. I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea to. In a story like this one, I wouldn't do it in a lot of fantasy stories. Certain types of games, yeah.
Think, especially if maybe it was a solo game, with just one player. That would really be like an interesting way to do it. So basically, then Perrin is talking shit to Shadow Throne here and says, you know, basically, I'm going to stay alive because of this, and he says, okay, yeah, that makes some sense. So he doesn't like help him through the gate and lets it go ahead, which it seems like maybe that would have foiled the plans of Opon if he did, if Perrin hadn't come up with this little ploy. And then you're also seeing there's like a foreshadowing of this sort of like almost like some kind of conflict with the hounds themselves, which I find pretty interesting. The creatures watched him still, their eyes faint coals. I'll have you yet. As if fanned by his silent promise, the red glows sharpened. So kind of interesting. Then Perrin actually comes back to life in Pale, where we see Picker and Antsy going over trying to. They even say this isn't Callum's work. Picker says when she's going over Perrin's, they thought it was his body because I think they even said that he had stopped bleeding at one point and his eyes were open, and then he starts bleeding again and then opens his eyes. And they mentioned Shednal, who I haven't really heard that much. Shednal's Mercy, another exclamation. Dealing with gods, I would think, but pretty cool. Then the next scene is another one that I think he does quite a bit. Well, you'll see throughout, where two nondescript guards are standing somewhere and they're talking, which kind of gives you another feeling of what it's like to be a guard, really. And what do you talk about when you're sitting there on guard duty with your partner?
Yeah,
which I thought was pretty interesting. And basically, Callum comes through and says, "You guys just hide. Don't actually do any guarding at this gate, or you're gonna die." So I'm not sure. I think it's just more foreshadowing for a later. But I do think a scene like this actually happens quite a bit throughout the books, where you'll see later. But as you're reading it, you might be like, "What is this scene about? Why did they even do it?" And then Tattersail is with the Fatid again. But she does see during that, she spots basically a hound on one of the cards. Which after another scene with the bridge burners leaving Pale on the Moranth, waiting for Quick Ben. Like, I think it almost like in this chapter, the scenes go faster and faster, and they're building up to a culmination of an explosion almost of activity with, all right, it looks like the bridge burners are taking off, but where's Quick Ben and Callum? Oh, wait, they're still following Hairlock as he's trying to, find out what's going on. And now the hounds have caught his trail. So that makes me, again, it's like, were the hounds searching for Hairlock the whole time, or how did the hounds show up at Hood's gate? I don't really know. Is that maybe they were on alert because of Hairlock and that's why they found Perrin? But apparently they didn't know that Opon was hanging out there. This whole description of Hairlock trying to flee, and the idea of these powerful hounds that Opon was afraid enough to leave when they showed up are now chasing after Hairlock, who, kind of shows what a powerful wizard he might have been or is. They also, I guess there's also an indication that, I guess I didn't mention this, but they basically brought Perrin to Tattersail's tent, right? Or her house.
Mm-hmm. Her room.
Yeah, her room, wherever it might be, like in an inn or something. And then basically it's like, Quick Ben's like, we got to take off now. Good luck. We got to take off. We got to go jump on some quarrels and get out of here. So you're on your own, basically. We get to see more of we're back on the rooftop then, where the quarrels are showing up with getting ready to take off. And you just get to see some more, in an earlier scene, Fiddler tossing his sword to the side, and the High Fist is like, "Is that your sword?" And he obviously never wants to use it, even though he's been around for 9 years. He never wants to keep his sword with him. I thought that was a pretty interesting piece. Have I been talking the whole time? You got anything for me?
I think you should keep talking because we're running out of time, and we should just burn through the last little bit of this.
All right. So I think that the most important thing is that they get in a big fight because the Hound, instead of going after Taskren like they had thought, actually follows Hairlock to Tattersail's room. And there's a battle between Gear, a very specific one of the hounds, and Tattersail. And she seems to do okay, but she has no way, because it seems pretty immune to magic. and I think it expects to be immune to regular weapons as well. But Perrin actually shows up and basically stabs the Hound a pretty bad wound. Hairlock actually looks like he got involved in the fight too, but that just kind of shows almost 2 near high mages against 1 Hound, and there's still really not enough. So it makes it make sense that they would be sending try to send a Hound after Taskren to deal with him. But once again, the chapter or the scene ends with the idea of a spinning coin.
That the spinning coin, and then of course now we know a little more about the spinning coin, having been through the death and resurrection sequence with
Perrin. Yeah, we find out exactly who Opon is, and it's interesting that Opon's only one god, but it's these twins who don't always necessarily want to do the same thing.
No,
and I don't really know if that's something that you see very often in mythology or anything like that. All right, are we running out of time because we're supposed to be done at 8 or what?
Well, we are supposed to be done at 8, right? So
yeah. Man, we're kicking butt compared to what we normally do.
That's true, but I was just saying the other thing is that I only got like halfway through the end of chapter 4 before I had to log on for my reread. So I read it a couple weeks ago, and then the last little bit is the bit that I didn't get a chance to reread.
Yeah, the this depthness of what I've been going into it, and maybe we don't have to, but I really like to talk about it, and then later.
Yeah, no, I think next time we'll figure out how to. Maybe for next time we can even talk about like a better plan for like calling out specific things to talk about as we go through. That might be a good idea.
Yeah.
If we want to, I don't know how we want to do it, but anyway, no, I thought Perrin stabs the Hound that the mages couldn't deal with, and somehow that sends it away. And he's got this. Is his sword become magic? Because his sword was with him in the realm, right? The Hood's realm.
Well, he did ask something like he got a sword and then he has a name. He doesn't say what the sword's name is, but there is some foreshadowing maybe that he's basically saying, so fortuitously called like fortune or luck or coin or something. You have the idea that maybe it has some kind of name, that maybe that's why Opon is so interested in him.
Yep. Well, but I thought it was interesting, the idea that when he's in Hood's Warren or whatever, the liminal space about to be taken through the gate and all that sort of stuff, they talk about his sword, and it sounds like he's got his sword with him.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of an interesting question, sort of, again, one of those sort of metaphysics cosmology. Yeah, Fred Daniel says, I think this is about the chapter where it dawned on me that there were some very powerful players that were involved with layers of schemes. Definitely, this is when I think we get the first kind of really open intervention, right? Bringing somebody back from the dead, basically, by a god, sort of the most open. I mean, we've seen some pretty powerful stuff, right? We saw Animander Rake blast a whole bunch of Malazan troops with his magic, but we haven't seen anything quite as spectacular, I think.
Well, and that almost felt like it was in the backdrop almost. It wasn't like with who we've been calling our protagonist, Gainos Perrin, right?
Yeah,
yep. And I think it starts to show you that these guys are all afraid of one Hound.
Yeah.
But then Garen actually hurts it. So that definitely makes you wonder what's going on with that and why that happens. And then it looks like we're on to book 2, where we travel to the other city that was mentioned, Darujistan. So we made it, guys. It only took 3 episodes to go through 4 chapters. So we got a little faster. We picked up 2 chapters today.
Yeah, we did.
I guess I kind of fast forwarded the end, but I mean, it's kind of more of the same. Sometimes a book is going to be like that. And like you said, I don't know.
Well, and there's a lot of stuff that, is good reading, but it isn't necessarily quite as necessary yet to talk about. I suspect there will be right next time we may talk about like, oh, and there was this thing that was one of the things mentioned in the previous reading has to do with this other, thing that's going on. So, who knows? But yeah, I think we did a good job.
Have you ever used like an ascendant like these hounds before in a game?
An ascendant like these hounds.
They talk about the hounds were around before the Realm of Shadow came about. Like, because they said it's a new warren. It carved an area out of Hood's warren plus another one, the light, and then these shadow hounds were already known to be, and they talk about a power that was before that even ascendants are worried about. So I find that really fascinating.
Yeah, like the idea of taming a demigod to
it's like Cerebrus being something else, or Fenrir, right?
Yep.
Being almost something that's like the gods, but almost outside of them in its primality or something.
Yeah, I've definitely used beings or kind of powers within, or sort of implied powers within the world. I don't think I've ever done anything as direct as having a Hound of Shadow show up in one of the characters' rooms to bash down the door and get stabbed. But
yeah,
definitely had the implication of very ancient non-human beings that are sort of like gods, or that are sort of treated like gods that existed at one time. That's something that I've done.
So in a few sessions of Kalmata, I've mentioned these powerful. I've done a few things. Like, I've had ancient characters that are pre-human history cultures that the characters have kind of tapped into in certain situations. But then, I almost lost what I was talking about. But I've also had like this creature called a semi-lich, not a demi-lich, but a semi-lich. And they were fighting each other. Like, they were called the Triumvirate, but they were trapped in an area and they actually were against each other. And the group jumped in with them. And then I gave one of the players one of the semi-liches to actually control. So it is like an ultra, I wouldn't say that these are like ascendants, but I do play with this concept of, it seems like maybe as you go up in power, you do kind of remove yourself from the natural flow of being concerned about the common human or the common person even, and you're dealing with higher issues. And I think that's a cool thing. So what do we got up next week?
Next week, we are going to be talking about a story from Thieves' World. Yeah, look at that. What did we settle on? We settled on Shadow Spawn as the story that we're going to read.
That's correct.
At least for now, unless Hobbs calls an audible again.
Nope, I don't think I'm going to.
Nope, not going to.
Shadow Spawn is one of the reasons, my inspirations for often playing thief characters.
All right. Well, then we're going to read Shadow Spawn for next time, and we're going to talk about it. And I don't think we're not going to have a guest. At least right now, we don't have a guest lined up. So
Yeah, and if you happen to know someone with this
mellifluous